Well, welcome everybody as you're coming in to this webinar with these two very special people focusing on people-powered change in South Africa. It's a real pleasure for me to be here hosting this conversation today. My name is Louise Pulford, and I'm the CEO at SIX, or the Social Innovation Exchange, based in London, but we work globally. And our focus as an organization is to enable organizations to collaborate and come together and solve some of the world's biggest challenges, because we believe the more we're open to the world and the more we're open to the collective power of citizens, the more we can create change for the better. And so that's what we're here to do. And we bring interesting people together to have conversations, to dive into issues that are facing us at the moment. We're doing a lot of work at the moment in South Africa. We have an event coming up later in the year, a people-powered change focused in Durban. And so to get us all in the mood for that, we're going to have a conversation with these two very special people. As I was just saying to them before the session, introducing them could take about 45 minutes. So I'm going to do a very short introduction to both of them, and hopefully you'll learn more about some of their experiences as we go on. A few things to note about them, though, is, they have many things in common, two South Africans, one in South Africa and one no longer, or not at the moment. They're both very sexy for us, and that means they have a wide range of experience in many, many, many different sectors. Professor Francis Peterson is an engineer, and Francois Bonici is a doctor, amongst many, many other things. So let me start by introducing Francois, and then I'll come on to you, Francis. So Francois Bonici, head of the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship based in Geneva, and also head of foundations there, including leading the Young Global Leaders and Global Shapers program at the World Economic Forum. As I said, he's a doctor, he's a professor, he's a social change practitioner, and you probably know him from his recent book, The Systems Work of Social Change. And I'm sure a lot of the topics that came out from that book we'll hear in this conversation today. Professor Francis Peterson is the outgoing, I should say, Vice Chancellor and Principal at the University of the Free State. And it is with Professor Francis that we will be hosting this amazing meeting later on in the year in Bloemfontein, which is a place that everybody must go. And UFS is a place that everybody must visit. So Professor Francis has been with the university since 2007 and is about to start a new role as Vice Chancellor of the University of Pretoria in October later on in the year. So big congratulations to you, Francis, for that amazing role. Professor Francis has so many awards, accolades, board positions that I'm not going to list. But I do just want to say something that I read in a tribute to Professor Francis this morning, because I think it's really going to guide the conversation. It says a lot about who he is, the work he's done at the University of the Free State, and also I think about, my experience of working with him and his team in South Africa at the moment. And that tribute said that Francis is the sort of person that will fight for things that you care. You should fight for things that you care about, but do it in a way that you will lead others to join you. And that's the kind of leadership that has inspired me and my team to work with the University of the Free State, and also something that has inspired me about South Africa. And so with that, let me start with you, Francis, and we'll kick off the discussion, because I'd love to hear from your perspective why now this is a critical moment in South Africa, but also why, and this is why we're coming in doing this work with you as well. So, Francis, kick us off and tell us what's happening and why we should all be visiting you.
Okay, thank you very much, Louise, and it's fantastic to be here and sharing the platform with with a colleague, Francois Bonici. We're spending a lot of time together at the University of Cape Town, and then he decided to leave South Africa. But I'm pretty sure that his heart is still with South Africa. But just to start, Louise, I often say that one have to understand context, and context is very, very important. And the history of countries are often shaped, or the where the country is now is often shaped by the history which they come from. And South Africa, in particular, we got the history of colonialism and apartheid, and that has shaped the country and the people in the country in certain ways. So if and I'm not going to dwell in colonialism and apartheid, but I want to move to our first the democracy that started in 1994. Um, and in that democracy, the focus was almost where we are today in our political dispensation, which I will come back a little bit later, is how do we get the country to work? We have challenges of exclusion. We have challenges of human rights that weren't dealt with properly. So the issues of transformation, inclusion on diversity, human rights, social justice, reconciliation, those were particular issues that were on the table for the politicians, but also the other parts of the community, civil society, non-governmental organizations, institutions of higher learning, schools, your general citizen, to deal with collectively. And I think South Africa have done fairly well in the first 10 years, I would say, of that democracy. This morning I was looking at the GDP growth from 1994 to 2007 that were actually trending in the right direction. But obviously there were period post 2007 that South Africa didn't do that well politically, and that obviously impacted the society. It impacted the citizens in the country, and it also impacted how South Africa were looked at by the world outside of South Africa. So if I go back to the democracy, South Africa had to engage with setting up a constitution, and I think it's a very progressive constitution. There are aspects in the constitution that other parts of the world still envy South Africa for. We started a human rights commission that deal with the issues of human rights. There was the Truth and Reconciliation Committee and Commission that focused on the hurts of the past and how do we deal with that. There was the formation of the Constitutional Court, the formation of the Gender Commission. So all of those things were things that were totally new in the dispensation of a growing democracy. And there's a lot there that I believe South Africa can share with the world. Uh, Learnings that we picked up that didn't work, and how do we make sure that we refine it, and that we can offer that to the globe, because similar challenges are playing out in other parts of the world. So let me fast forward to 2024. We were part of probably about 64 countries that are currently having their elections around the globe. And our election happened probably about a few weeks ago, and it was a fair election. It was an election that we can all be proud of. But out of that election was definitely a coalition government that is going to be formed. We call it the Government of National Unity. And there, what was shown there was for me, up until now, a high level of maturity of different key politicians to say that like in 1994, we will have to work together if we want to deal with the issues of social cohesion, of unemployment, of making sure that we got a growth in the economy, and making sure that we bring all the citizens with us to be able to get an output. So for me, this is a moment. This is a moment that every institution and any organization in South Africa should take note of, and to say, well, this is a very good example that we need to work together. And whether that working together is horizontal or vertical, bottoms up, top down, it doesn't really matter. We will work it out. But this is where we are. And I think, and that's going to be where I'm going to make a last point on this particular topic, is, is often when you work with this sort of messiness, you know, this is a framework, but you don't know actually where you're going with it. There is where real innovation starts to happen. And I think this is where we are at the moment. And later on, I'm going to tell you a little bit more what the University of the Free State, in the context of 26 other public institutions in South Africa, are doing to take this moment and to say, well, how do we seize this moment to make the sort of promise that 1994 put us on the table, and not repeating some of the mistakes and some of the non-optimized solutions that were put on the table to the challenges that South Africa had.
Francis, thank you so much for kicking us off, and there is so much in there for us to unpick. And I'll hand it over to Francois to do that, or at least to introduce yourself and kind of reflect on some of the things that Francis has said as well. But also from your perspective as a South Africa that's got a global role now, who is seeing this from the outside, what you think the world needs to learn from South Africa and why this is a critical moment now. I mean, that's the most important thing for SIX as an organization, that we learn from other parts of the world, and we see things, we see the challenges that we face are so similar, and there is a lot to learn from places, even if we think they're different to us. So and I should say before you start as well, please feel free. There will be a question and answer section at the end, but if you have questions throughout, please feel free to add your questions in, and I'll try and incorporate them as we go along as well. But Francois, welcome. Thank you for joining us too. And yeah, give us your reflections on why now is a critical moment.
Thank you, Louise, and lovely to be in South Africa virtually for a part of my day. Thank you, Francis, for hosting us. And just lovely to see you again, and why we need leaders like you in our country and around the world. It's really a pleasure again. I wanted to pick up on something Francis said, and that was from my own perspective. I think living through apartheid and then the immediate post apartheid period, like just on a personal level, I obviously had the privilege of being a white South African, educated. I became a doctor and very quickly recognized, you know, the deep inequalities that history created. And I think so South Africa is very unique because of that history, but in a way, many countries have inherited some kind of either colonialism or you know, prejudice or oppressive groups or minority groups, and are wrestling with some of the, you know, the consequences of those today. And so I remember just before setting up the Bertha Center at the University of Cape Town, together with Francis' support, recognizing that actually South Africa is really a hotbed for social innovation because of that history and context, and because, like in many parts of the world, governments can't do everything. Markets don't provide for everyone. And the reality is people do it for themselves, right? In one way or another. And that, you know, has come to be a term that we're calling social innovation, that we call social innovation, which is really about people developing the solutions, the services, the communities, the organizing themselves. And in the past, it happened a little bit in isolation and in gaps. And I think the recognition now that that's actually where some of the answers lie, because they don't all lie within the halls of business and CEOs and capital, and they don't lie only in the corridors of government either, in parliament. So I remember, so many actually other institutions, universities coming to South Africa, researching what was going on before our own universities were really doing that, and recognizing that in these gaps there was amazing people doing incredible things from very small to very large levels. And I think that we've seen that actually has there's so much to learn. And in a way, South Africa is also a microcosm of the challenges the world is facing, whether it's climate change, whether it's youth unemployment, whether it's obesity and malnutrition, whether it's chronic diseases, infectious diseases, whether it's how do we use the amazing resources we have, whether it's transitions from a resource-based economy, all of these questions, right? How do we bridge digital divides? All of that is playing out in some very local and national ways in South Africa. And yet we have this incredible resource of talent and physical resources in the country. And so it's a really special learning environment, I think, one of its own history, but two of things that are relevant for the world. And I remember just coming to quickly to speak about universities for a moment, when we hear about research from kind of a global institution, a global West institution, we think those are global perspectives. And yet when we see research from a university in India or a university in South Africa, that's perceived as local. But actually, as Hans Rosling, the famous kind of epidemiologist, spoke about, that he's got a new name for the developing world. We'll just call it the world, because that's where 80% of the people live. And so actually the context and the research and the work that's happening in these kinds of spaces is actually where the majority of people live right now. That's why a country like South Africa is really interesting in the context of what's happening there. Why this time, I think, was your question, Louise. So I'll try to come back to your question. Yeah, I mean, I think we as you mentioned, Louise, that there isn't a space you go into today where there are contested spaces. We have wars in the world. We have economies on the brink. We're in the middle of huge transitions. We're facing significant challenges about transitioning to climate change while still ensuring people's livelihoods and dignity at the same time. And that's a really complex space to navigate. So for governments and regulators to think that they can navigate through this alone is naive at best. And I think kind of what we're starting to see is a recognition that investing only in private sector development, right, is insufficient to build. Maybe it's sufficient to build GDP and economies, but it's insufficient to really build sustainability and resilience, and particularly given South Africa and Africa's future around this, huge and really exciting opportunity for young people, this growth in youth is actually a significant opportunity. But we need to think differently about that future than we did in the last couple of decades. Maybe I'll pause there, because I also have lots of other things to go into, but I'll stop.
So many things to go into. But as you pause, actually, just to keep going with you, Francois, and then we'll come back to you, Francis. Just you both touched on so many things, but one of the things you both touched on a lot is change doesn't happen in the corridors of power. We have this amazing resource of people. What's different now, or what's interesting now at this moment, is it's starting to be recognized. And Francis, you talked about, change happens, horizontally and vertically. It's not just one or the other. So I just wonder whether, Francois, you could just continue a little bit on this kind of top-down, bottom-up institutions that support. How do we support and capitalize on, recognize, enable more of this change? What does that kind of communication almost look like between these two places? And then Francis, I'll come to you, and you can maybe build on that more specifically from a university perspective.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
That's a book in itself. But let me start. I think we need to recognize first the role certainly that civil society have played, right, and really being the kind of the protection, the solidarity, the building block of the social space, right? And of communities. And that's civil society in all its forms, from, you know, informal groups right through to these kind of formal larger institutions. And I think what has emerged from that space, and a recognition that between the public and the civil and private sectors, there is this space for thinking about how we improve our societies, that it's everyone's responsibility, and that each individual can have a role, and that kind of opening up of that recognition that there is something beyond charities over here, business over here, and government over here, but actually in the 21st century, we all have a stake in our common future, and we all need to be working towards that. And there is a blurring of lines in between those spaces, and it's rather about what's fit for purpose rather than where do you ideologically sit. So that's an exciting recognition that we don't have to be trapped by, a particular way of thinking in the industrial era in the 20th century. The next, I think, is, as you've said, because there's been, I think, recognition of social innovation as a movement of people. And someone, it was, trying to remember his name, the author, who called it the greatest movement of our time that doesn't have a face and doesn't have a name. No matter which neighborhood or community you go into, Paul Hawken, he said, no matter which neighborhood or community you go into, you'll find a small organization or a small group of people working on something, cleaning up their river, or connecting to their local councillor, or having a food bank. No matter what it is, there is this movement of things of people that are recognizing they want to participate in improving the world. And I think going from that to now recognizing, we did some global research on the last 10 years of data around social enterprises in the world, and looked at how globally there are now approximately 10 million social enterprises right now. So that's 3% of all companies in the world have explicitly been set up with a social and environmental purpose. They employ 200 million people, 2 trillion worth of annual revenue, and larger than the advertising and fashion industries. So this is no longer, only a set of small things. There's also now a significant economic benefit, job creation in the sector, as it kind of is expressed in organizational form. And now we're also seeing huge international recognition to invest in this part of an economy that is more socially and environmentally oriented. And so the first United Nations General Assembly resolution on the social economy was last year in April. The European Union have a 7-year action plan. The African Union are about to launch a 10-year strategy in July this year. The OECD has a set of recommendations for all of their member states, and ILO was actually the first set of unanimous support from all of their ministers of labor across at their ILC, their large conferences. Suddenly there's this large international recognition that actually there's something we can do to help nurture this. But those big international statements require institutions, right, to actually then support, carry out, incentivize, nurture everyone from the young individual right through to kind of more well-established organizations in the space. So maybe I'll leave it there, Louise, but that was a very quick, things have moved very quickly in the last 2 years that have actually been building for decades to recognize that there is a legitimate alternative, to capitalism that is genuinely driving inclusion and sustainability.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. So Louise and I totally agree with what Francois said. And I think in a South African context, we must never underestimate the strength of the civil society, and where government failed in particular areas, civil society, without incentivization, actually pull certain things through. And that for me is a critical aspect. Some business and private sector and industry have also seen that and ask, how can we systematize it? How can we frame it with the idea of potentially scaling those initiatives? And I think they started with the whole focus on the social responsiveness agenda, but not having I would say universities or entities where research could be conducted in terms of how that section or sector operates. They tried to I would say industrialize the approach, which I think they didn't get it perfectly right. So for us, it's important then, and that will be a question that I would ask Francois a little bit later, is to say, well, if these things or activities or social innovations and approaches happened in spaces around us, how do we learn from it? Not to define technologies to say, well, these could be impacting a society positively. That one can do as well. But is there underlying systems, approaches that could inform policy, that could inform scalability, that could inform sustainability, to make this much bigger than what it is, understanding that different contexts will be embedded in that. And we when myself and Francois was together at University of Cape Town, we started to unpack that to a certain extent. But then obviously a lot has happened, and it would be important for me from where Francois is at the moment to hear his specific thoughts. But let me zoom in a little bit closer to home, at the University of the Free State, because here we work with developing the next generation that will have to interface in this space. But we also are grappling with the question, to what extent does universities, and not only in South Africa, on the continent and globally, grapple with the question is, how do we in fact improve the life of society, make the life of society better? And here society could be defined as not only the communities that we're talking about, but also business and other sectors of society. And that's a question that we continuously have to ask ourselves as universities, because that to a certain extent provide legitimacy of universities to exist, to say that we are actually social change agents. And how are you doing it? You're not only playing a transformative role of developing the next generation of citizens and professionals, but you also have to do something now. And at the University of the Free State, we do that in different ways. We have got a very strong focus on service learning, where students are in fact tasked to engage with their communities from the profession where they study, so that to say, well, what are we engaging with that? Then we have got our academic staff that has to make sure that we're not only producing new knowledge, we're actually producing new knowledge that should be making an impact in society. And if you want to make the impact in society, you need to understand who is the society that you engage with. Do you have a relationship? Who are the key people in the society? Are there champions that you identify that you can engage with to be able to make sure that that knowledge transfer, that engagements do happen? But then we emphasizing a very good term that take collaboration a little bit further. We talk about co-creation, to say that that society that we engage with, that might not be that easily defined in a way, they also got a face. They also got knowledge. They also got wisdom. To what extent do you co-create a solution, a framework, where whatever you're developing at the university does have a huge probability of being taken up, being utilized, and actually enhance the life of people? And that is what we call not only community engagement, we call it actually engaged scholarship. because it's through our scholarship that we're engaging with the society. And out of that, there's a lot of innovations that flow. And that's some of the innovations that we talk about, that we want to talk about more, that we want to share with colleagues outside of South Africa. Some of those innovations really have impacted people. And what happened, I've been co-supervisor of one of our students that do a joint degree with the university, the Vrije University in Amsterdam. And last week, I was part of her defense in Amsterdam. And her focus was specifically about how do we engage with communities to ensure that our innovation, our knowledge are being taken up by communities. And it is a pretty good case study of the University of the Free State, where we engage with our communities. And why is it important? As a university, we have our one campus that's operating in an urban setting in Bloemfontein. And then we've got another campus that's operating in a rural setting. It's a place called Kwakwa. I'm not going to ask you to pronounce that for me later on, Louise, but it's a place called Kwakwa. And it's very poor communities that lives around the university. And therefore, bringing urban and rural together, bringing the university and different communities together, are some of the learnings that we have to be able to say, well, how do you, as a university, not only produce the next generation of professionals or citizens, but you also make sure that you take your community, whether they're urban or whether they're rural, with you through the solutions that you co-create to make an impact.
Thank you so much, Francis. And there's, again, I'll let you come back in on that, Francois. And maybe in this next kind of little round as well, feel free to start to ask each other questions as well, because I'm sure there are, you know, you worked together many years ago, but this is a nice time for you to catch up as well. But I think one of the things that's so transferable to, well, I hope other universities, but all institutions that you've been talking about here, Francis, is how you make the walls of a university more porous, and also, but how do you make institutions part of society as opposed to the kind of traditional knowledge-focused ivory towers that are not accessible for people. And I think, you know, by using that language as well of co-creation is meaning that we're doing something together, and it's a very special approach. Actually, before I come back to Francois on this, I just wonder whether you might share a little bit, Francis, on how you go about encouraging other universities to take a similar approach, because I'm sure not all of them do, and whether there's any kind of difference you see between public and private universities and how that's working. So yeah, your leadership in encouraging that kind of approach would be lovely to hear.
No, thanks, Louise. You know, obviously there's good collaboration between institutions in South Africa, and we don't see ourselves as competitors necessarily. There might be certain areas where which are very distinct, and we profile it along those lines, but we start to learn from one another. So we do have in the past various areas that we work together. One area is the area of student success, and we define in South Africa, and particularly in the University of the Free State, student success is a social justice issue. We've been leading initiatives amongst probably about 13 or 14 or 15 universities in South Africa on student success, sharing a community of practice. The same we're doing in community engagement and engaged scholarship. And I'm at the moment the chair of University South Africa. So all of the 26 public universities is in one association. It's called University South Africa, and I'm the chair of that. And through that, I engaging with all the 26 vice chancellors in universities and try to say, how can we actually work together, not only as universities, but where there are linkages with other sectors of the economy, where there is government, where there is foundations in South Africa and abroad, whether it's national and non-governmental organization or civil society, how we can work on specific topics. So that is one of the contributions that I'm trying to make, to take the sector actually with us. And you will never, at universities, it's like vice chancellors are like herding cats. You would never have one particular view, but it's important that where there are areas where there's obvious synergy for us to take the sector forward, because there's a challenge in South Africa on job creation. There's a challenge in social cohesion. There's a challenge in how do we connect the different sectors as an ecosystem of innovation. And if you can bring the education sector with us, then even better. So I'm using that platform. And a final point in terms of the collaboration, I'm now currently engaging with Business Unity in South Africa to see how the sector collectively can operate and work with a business. Now, they are much more formalized, they've got a more structure, but I believe that higher education is a public good and a private good. And that brings me to your last question about private institutions. We have seen a proliferation of private higher education institutions in South Africa, as you would probably see elsewhere in the world. Again, my view is not as competition, but to say, well, maybe there's another value proposition that they could also bring to the table where we could work together. And that's a conversation that we haven't started yet, but I'm trying to create a platform for us to work together. Because ultimately, it is about getting to the same objective. And that is to make sure that education, which is a human right, is available to everyone, but that will also help us to make not only South Africa and the continent competitive, but also share that as global citizens in other platforms.
Thank you. Now, Francois, I give you the hard jobs here because
But you still need to answer my question.
It was so long ago. I think there are a couple of questions, if you allow me, but also tell me what you want me to talk about. But I think there are some questions really about the role of universities in social innovation in the context, I think, that Francis spoke about. So that was part of Francis's question. And then I think also there are one or two questions in the chat from Francois Strydom and others as well on that. And then there's some very challenging questions in the chat as well.
That's right. I was going to give you that one next. But
okay, well, let me take the more concrete one. And I mean, there are a lot of people with experience in the webinar chat here as well. So also great to see comments. I think the one recognition is what a huge important role universities play, not only in knowledge, but actually in developing industry, right? It's not often recognized. I mean, sometimes it's with industry, but even that basic research that's done, we all talk about all these big tech companies. We know so much of that basic research happens, at university level. And I think one of the things that we haven't recognized and we're starting to recognize is how universities can create that same kind of possibility mindset thinking around young people about the future, right? And not just about what your career might be or what the next phone and how interesting that's going to be. And of course, those things will transform our lives, and that's part of the social innovation world. But it's really not seeing our social challenges as that kind of problem complex, like I'm just going to give up because I'm so paralyzed, how difficult that is to change anything, but really to tap into young people who are so ready and have so full of ideas, but to give them that outlet and to make them recognize that can be nurtured, that can be invested in that. And if we take that same kind of R&D approach that we think about for kind of, the engineering side of all of your work, Francis, that you did, like, can we take that same kind of, rigor and level of investment and ambition and excitement and possibility around innovation, around how school systems work better, or how we can include people with disabilities in society, like that? Young people are so ready for that. And I think universities have a huge role to play, not only in the kind of programs and infrastructure, but in the culture, right? In the culture of what we instill in young people, because they're already there. I think that's the main thing. But what we've done in the past is said, no, you need to be a doctor or an engineer or something like. And that's the first bit. The second bit is that it is really transdisciplinary, right? And that actually, if we have every citizen thinking, no matter where they are and what kind of organization or career or work path they end up in, they have an opportunity to make things better in their small spaces, in their large spaces. So I do think it starts to be that instill the collective mindset again and thinking about our collective future rather than the individual mindset that universities are here to help you get a career, right? I think there's something culturally around that social innovation is helping to bring to the transformation of universities that Francis was talking about, that engaged scholarship. There is that engaged scholarship with industry. It's quite structured, right? There is, and how we do that. And I think we're starting to see the structures develop with how we partner with civil society, because civil society and the social space actually benefits hugely from academia, for legitimizing their work, giving them an opportunity to reflect, facilitation through difficult challenges, being a bridge builder to governments and industry. Universities actually play a really, really interesting role and can do a lot to work in partnership. And then there's some really interesting examples in the world where research agendas are set by communities, right? And that research then helps to feed back. And when that is involved in a way not to see only, the civil society or community as subjects of research, but actually real kind of drivers of the questions and therefore potential uptakes or, and applicants and implementers of the insights, I think that's a really important role. Of course, funding in this space is very different to the industry world, but that's part of the challenge that we need to discover the mechanisms to do that. And people, we've found ways to do that. So that's the not the easy question, but at least there is a lot of experience around the world, and I think South Africa in particular. I mean, look, universities around the world right now are soul searching a little bit around what, and also we see what young people really want, and they do want to drive justice, they do want to drive inclusion, they do. And of course, they want to be better off themselves. But I think South African universities are in a really important place in the future of our country. So thanks to Francis and all of his colleagues who do the really, really difficult work of much more than herding.
Yeah. So I want to, sorry, Louise.
You go ahead, Francis, and then I've got a harder question for you next.
For me, okay, that's
or
fine.
For both of you, actually.
So I do think that there's probably 2 points I just want to make about the voice of the younger generation. Before the 1994 election, there was the 1976 uprise of youngsters in South Africa. In fact, we celebrated Youth Day on the 16th of June to celebrate that, and that was all about language, but it was broader than that. It was about diversity and inclusivity. And then in 2015 and 16, we had two campaigns that happened in the higher education universities, the Rhodes Must Fall and Fees Must Fall campaigns, that have shifted. The issue was about free higher education, but there were issues also about diversity and inclusivity, colonization, the issues that challenges society as such. But those are wake-up calls that I think we also have to listen. So there was one of the questions is, how does university respond to social innovation per se? And I agree with Francois. Up until probably a few years back, the focus at universities was very much on technology development. So where you have a structure, diffusion and transfer of knowledge to a framework like business, industry, and the private sector. But as more of these challenges actually play out in communities, in society, where those structures aren't though clearly defined, university starts to develop the whole co-creation model. And so there isn't a technology push or a push for issues only. There is also what we can offer jointly to be able to meet the sort of top-down, bottom-up approach halfway. And that for me is very, very important. But institutions like those that Francois and others are engaging with, it's important for us to understand what are the inhibitors to make sure that social innovation is actually working extremely well, keeping in mind that different contexts will inform those solutions. And that is where I say it's beyond the just clean interventions that universities provide. It is about that sort of porous frameworks that we need to learn from one another. Funding is one of them. Intermediaries, that's one of them. Champions are one of them. And I think there's a whole lot of them. But how do we make sure that that becomes embedded in institutions like universities, which traditionally have worked with the formal structures? And I think those diffusion is for me quite important. And therefore, it asks us the question that who are the entities that universities should be in working with? And I often say in the University of the Free State and to the sector that universities are not the only custodians of knowledge and also wisdom. And if you have that sort of approach, that open up immediately the attitude that you would have in engaging with other sectors of society. And that for me is a critical one that we should do more and more to make sure that those border structure, the fact that universities there is not an entity on the hill, that you start to engage. The knowledge development, the key knowledge development will also always be a critical part of a university. But there are other think tanks, other research that's been conducted that we should utilize and not start to develop a block to say, well, you know, we as academics or as universities know everything. So, you know, we're not going to be able even to entertain any particular input from other sectors. I thought I want to make that point. But you can now ask me the difficult question.
Well, I am actually going to apologize to all of the people in the chat who have asking us amazing questions, because, you know, we're 10 minutes to go. We're definitely not going to be able to get through all of these. But what I will promise that we'll do is we'll take them down. And as we said at the beginning, this is a kind of warm up, and there'll be many more of these warm ups, but a warm up to the event that we're hosting in Bloemfontein later in the year, which needs to be a global discussion. We want to bring the world down, so we have this kind of conversation in much more detail over a couple of days where we can really dive into these, because these are amazing issues. And, you know, we're talking about universities here, but as Francois leads of another type of institution, we do a lot of work with philanthropy. And so I think, you know, this conversation needs to go deeper. So I'm going to apologize to all the people that we don't get through to all of their questions. But for the last 10 minutes, I'm actually going to frame us out a little bit more and go back to kind of the role of South Africa in the world. And one of the questions that came in earlier on that I think, Francois, you'd noticed from Solange was around the role of social innovators and entrepreneurs in transforming global and local power dynamics, not just addressing social challenges, and really empowering people in the global south. And I think you both will have some really interesting perspectives on this. And in our last kind of moments, so I can give you time to answer these things, so I'd love you also to think about, you know, the future and where we're headed and what kind of vision you have for the future, what hope you have in terms of the institutions and the roles that you're playing in particular in going forward. Because in many of the other questions, you know, there are challenges in competition and resources that people have mentioned, and are we making enough progress? You know, all of the questions have this kind of element in. So So at the same time as answering this question about power dynamics, I'd love you to think about and respond a little bit to the kind of future and tell us a bit if you're hopeful. Are you hopeful? I hope you are, and why, and where you think we should be headed in this. And then, of course, we'll be able to go much deeper when we spend a few days together. But Francois, why don't you kick us off on this? Global power dynamics, go.
I think it's an important question because it speaks to actually how change happens, right? And at the heart of change is power. Right, at the heart of the history of that we were speaking about of South Africa is power. At the heart of civil society being able to have influence that is distinct and different, and sometimes at odds with business and government, is power, right? So it does actually is at the root of so many things, because actually the changes, and I think people, asking questions on have we made enough progress? We haven't, and part of the reason is the entrenchment of structures and systems and powers, right? And I think that's the recognition that the field of social innovation has really got to from, I guess, its first iteration of like, here are good ideas and solutions emerging from people who are living with challenges or are experiencing them, through to let's build organizations and structures and get investment and design it, using the market system a little bit to implement it, and be this hybrid between civil society and the private sector. And that was helpful as a phase, but also realized was kind of still that the changes were not necessarily happening to the depth and scale that we wanted, because there are all these underlying structural power issues, right? And getting to a point now of recognizing actually social innovation, to a large degree, is rooted in issues of equity and justice, right? And that actually, to address those things, that actors in social innovation need to be starting to address these things. And there's a huge way to go, right? So, I mean, without kind of recognizing that, how do social innovators actually have influence and power at local, national, global levels? There's a long way to go, but I think they need to be coordinated. They need to find allies. They need to team up. And I think the way that actors who actively work against social progress look to divide, right? And so I think the way to build power is through kind of alliances and collective action. And so I think a lot of the social innovation, as you know, Louise was talking about, our work is looking at how do organizations work collectively under common goals, bringing, different quote unquote innovations, approaches, ways of working, alliances, communities of people into those spaces together, to really mobilize and shift the other institutional actors that might be potential barriers or partners in whatever the issue is, whether it's health or education or whatever it might be, or how the economy operates. So it's a really important question, and I think it's one obviously that takes much more to unpack. But again, coming back to, I know we've kind of spoken about the role of universities, but again, there is that's why I was saying the role of universities is important in terms of legitimizing and creating those spaces, and how it can be a partner with communities and civil society and social innovators in there. So it is also about the transfer of power and the creation of that. So that's the maybe tackling that one. Am I hopeful? Yes, I don't know if that's temperament or personality, but working in the social innovation space has made me very hopeful and optimistic. And I think also kind of one needs to be optimism to realize it, right? So I think if one is pessimistic, then you're probably not going to be thinking about kind of what could happen in a possibility. So the cautious optimist, yeah, it's a tough time in the world now, but I think that's the other inspiring thing, that by allowing this possibility thinking in our communities, in our universities, in our spaces, allows for hope to actually be realized rather than just be hope.
So no, thanks, Francois. So Louise, first of all, global power dynamics, to a certain extent, Francois have indicated already, that we need to be able to work together, to be able to engage with one another, to create that opening, and therefore tackle and break down that power dynamics. But to do that, you obviously need to make sure that the different entities that drive the power have got an understanding what social innovation is all about. And I think the fact that we as universities and entities or institutions like those that Francois look after, and others probably on the call, need to play a role where they are engaging or sitting next to those that hold the power, and try to indicate that how crucial social innovation is about, and to demonstrate. Because I often say, even, and we must learn from our experiences, if you go back and you want to create a solution for a challenge in industry, for instance, you need to talk their language. They need to understand that. So are we making sure that those that hold the power is continuously engaged with, to understand what social innovation and the value of social innovation is all about? That for me is the point that I just wanted to add what Francois have said. So
I'll give you 1 minute to give me your hope.
yeah, my hope, I'm actually very positive. I think we have got young people, and they are all inspired to make a difference. And I certainly feel that where we can talk through different transdisciplinary actions that we are doing, and utilizing different platforms, we must get the message back to say, there's a challenge. We're not going to be able to solve the challenges of the world if we don't work together. And I think an opportune time now, Louise, is the fact that we have a lack of leadership in the globe. Shouldn't social innovators use that opportunity, seize it, and try to embed themselves as critical solution offers to deal with the challenges that we have in the globe?
Amazing. In our last minute, I'm just going to say thank you so much. I could talk to you both for hours, and I look forward to doing so in person when we come and visit you in Francis. Thank you for your time, both of you. Thank you to everyone for the amazing questions. We will note them all down because there is so much in there, and I recognize every question you answered. We could have spent an hour on, because these are all really important moments. We'll put in the chat a bit more details about the meeting that we are hosting in September. Yeah, South Africa is just the most wonderful place, welcoming, full of incredible people, and every time I go, I leave with energy and hope, which is, I think, what the whole world needs more of right now. So thank you both for giving us some energy and hope on a Tuesday lunchtime afternoon, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Louise. Thanks, Francois.
Take care.
Lovely to see you both and everyone in the chat. I think there's a lot of richness there. So Louise, I think for the Indaba, there's lots of really good content that we didn't even get to, and some really important topics that I just commented on. So thank you so much.
Thank you both. All right, take care. And
Bye-bye.
thank you to everyone
Bye-bye.
for participating.